a statement now.
In these difficult circumstances, the country is passing by. President Hosni Mubarak has decided to step down. President Hosni Mubarak has decided to step down as president of Egypt, and he has decided that the Higher Council of the Armed Forces will lead the nation.
Overnight, Minneapolis on fire. Officers in riot gear tried to maintain order. In Los Angeles overnight, Black Lives Matter protesters blocked the major freeway. Now, after the 4 Minneapolis officers involved were fired, the city's mayor is calling on the county attorney.
When George Floyd was killed, I couldn't take it. And I felt myself compelled, regardless of COVID-19, to go and be part of the police marching against police brutality. Honestly, I was walking in the streets of Minnesota, but at the same time walking on the streets of Egypt. When I would see a police officer, I would see an Egyptian police officer and a Minneapolis police officer. I would see them because they act very similar. Their attitude is very similar. Americans don't know enough. Americans, especially young Americans, are not educated about the suffering that is happening places in different parts of the world.
When I was like 20 years old, I didn't understand anything about politics, about justice, about anything. I went to Tahrir Square in January 25th. I didn't understand what's going on. We went there just to ask for justice. The government and the regime didn't take what we asked for, and they started to shoot us with the tear gas and also with guns. The government started the violence. They tell everyone in the news, everything is great, there is no revolution, there is no protests, there is no anything, everything we're wonderful. So, it was crazy.
I didn't feel that I can talk freely, speak freely, move freely, think freely. And I was really about to leave the country.
January the 25th, the day of rage that led to the fall of a president.
We referred to it as the 18 days. And that was the 18 days between January 25th, 2011 and February 11th, 2011, when Mubarak stepped down.
Then, amid growing pressure and ever larger protests, the president finally buckles. After 30 years in charge, Hosni Mubarak's grip on power has come to an end.
When the revolution took place, it was such an unbelievable moment. It was impossible to believe that Mubarak would leave. First time I felt being a human being in Egypt.
At the beginning, no one was talking about Mubarak leaving. They were actually talking about structural reforms, right? Like a new electoral law and a new approach to parliament and all these things, but it just so rapidly coalesced around what people thought the most radical thing was, which was saying that the president should go.
I used to live in a city called Luxor, and I used to teach in a city called Kena. And the distance between Luxor and Kena is about 70 miles. And every time I drive from Luxor to Kena, during Mubarak, I would pass through no less than 7 checkpoints. I felt as if I were living under occupation. Imagine when the revolution took place, no checkpoints. I would drive all the way to my school. We had great hope for a better world because we had everything was not working. There was no good education. There was no good health services. There was no good economy. People were living under the line of poverty. So you cannot imagine, it was such a great moment. First time I saw Tahrir Square, I went to the ground and I thanked God that I can do things free for the first time in Egypt.
News of Mr. Mubarak's resignation drew a huge wave of honking and cheering in central Cairo, especially in the area around Tahrir Square, where demonstrators were in their 18th day of protests.
Mubarak stepped down, and the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces took over and started running the transition process. Summer passes, and then in November, December, there are supposed to be the first free parliamentary elections. The Muslim Brotherhood, being the best organized of the opposition groups in Egypt, stood to do very well in those elections. First round of the elections for president in May. There are a bunch of candidates, like 20-something candidates. So the top two were Ahmed Shafiq and Mohamed Morsi. At the end of June, Morsi won. And that is where Egypt shifts from being directly under the control of the military council to technically having an elected government.
We did not realize that the military is still in power. So when President Morsi was elected, he became the elected head of a corrupt government. So the military was not working with him. The judiciary was working against him. The police was working against him.
It deteriorated from there. Morsi started mobilizing his supporters to do counter-protests.
They don't really understand why the opposition is calling for the president to step down now. He's only been president for a year. He had a lot of problems. There's corruption in Egypt to deal with. Yes, it needs to be fixed, but it can't be done in a year.
The military came out with an ultimatum and said that if Morsi and his political opponents couldn't come to a consensus, which, of course they couldn't, the military would intervene.
The military intervened. Number one, kidnapped the president. The president was elected by the people. The military has no right to kidnap the president. You cannot do this in any country. And then arrested all his cabinet and arrested as many members of parliament as they could. And then they canceled the constitution, and then they imposed the state of emergency. People started saying no, marching in the streets. What the military did is started shooting people.
In my life, I have never thought that I will leave my country, because I love my country. I love everything there. After the coup in 2013, I have to move or to go somewhere because I couldn't work, I couldn't do anything, and I was working as a journalist in this time, and you cannot say anything. If you said anything against the regime, they will arrest you. We lost hope in Egypt. Everyone involved in this revolution, some people in a jail right now, some people had killed, or the government killed them, and some people left their country, like me.
I think the pace of change on issues of race in the past several months is actually totally astonishing. I remember when Black Lives Matter got started after Ferguson and after the murder of Trayvon Martin, and it didn't get picked up this way.
Council member Jeremiah Ellison is among 9 council members vowing to defund and dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department.
You know, there was a movement in Egypt in between 2004 and 2007 called Kifaya, and it was an anti-Mubarak social movement. They were calling for a more democratic system. On the surface, they were a flop, but a lot of the activists who'd put the organizing footwork into the 2011 uprising started out in Kifaya. We think about consequences way too narrowly. In terms of like, well, did it result in like this legislative change, or did it result in the leader stepping down? We can't predict everything, and political moments have these really complex consequences that you can't necessarily kind of game out in advance.
Watch for your democracy. Your democracy is important for the world. Don't let anyone steal it away from you. It's very important to participate in it. It's very important to vote. It's a must to vote to be able, because you have a peaceful avenue. And as long as you can change your presidents, your congressmen, your senators, your governors, your mayors, you are on a good side of history.